All right, let's kick things off. So today's episode is all about contract flowdowns, what they are, why they're not just boring paperwork, and honestly, why every prime contractor and subcontractor should care. To start simple, a flowdown clause is just a clause from a federal prime contract that gets included, flowed down, to a subcontract. And that means if you're a subcontractor, suddenly, this clause governs part of your world too. It's not just the prime's headache anymore.
Yeah, Eric, exactly. And this is a real foundational thing for anyone working with the FAR or DFARS. Each clause can have unique instructions in the text. Shall insert, incorporate, include, all these magic words. That's the government's way of flagging when a flowdown is actually required. You have to match up the work and the situation to the clause requirements. Because, for example, some clauses only kick in if the subcontract is over a certain dollar value or involves special handling, classified access, for instance.
Right. And I remember the first time this bit my team. We thought, why not? Let's just copy the entire prime contract text straight in. No harm done, right? Turns out that doesn't really fly. Later on, we learned about the UPMC Braddock v. Seth D. Davis case. CohnReznick points to this too, where the court said, basically, you can't enforce a catch-all flowdown of every single provision. Instead, you've got to actually pick clauses that apply. Otherwise, you get contradictions all over the subcontract, or just a straight-up unenforceable mess.
Yeah, and it's not just theory. If you think about it from the prime's perspective, the whole point is to make sure your sub is locked into the compliance and risk framework you're responsible for to the government. Things like cost allowability, performance requirements, and cybersecurity, that all gets pushed down to the subs. But shovel everything over, and next thing you know, your sub's lawyers will push back, or worse, the contract is just full of gotchas. So you have to be deliberate.
And from the sub side, you want to be in the federal market, but you don't want to trip over hidden obligations you never agreed to, or didn't even know about. So yeah, flowdowns sound technical, but they're a big deal whether you're the big dog or the underdog here.
Now let's get into mandatory versus non-mandatory flowdowns, because that is where all the confusion and mistakes happen. So bottom line, a clause is truly mandatory for flowdown when the FAR or DFARS language says so in those special phrases we mentioned, or when a threshold is triggered, like the value of the subcontract, or if certain types of work are being done. You actually got to read the clause. There's no such thing as an automatic flowdown for all clauses.
Yes, and not every clause the prime gets is supposed to hit the subs. That's a misconception, CohnReznick calls out. No automatic flowdowns. So, for commercial item subcontracts, think off-the-shelf products or standardized services, it's usually about 20 FAR clauses you must flow down. That's FAR 52.446C, Shun 1, and even there, a lot of those apply only above certain dollar amounts, so you really have to check those triggers.
And for those non-commercial item contracts, it can be even trickier. Maybe shall insert, maybe substance of this clause, which might mean you can tailor some of the language. And then there's always that temptation for primes to just stuff in every clause to push risk down the chain. That's actually a bad idea most of the time. You clog up the negotiation, inject requirements that don't fit, like, say, CAS or TINA stuff into a small business subcontract, and then struggle with compliance or even pricing.
Yeah, I saw this play out at a small IT firm. They won a federal job as a prime for the first time. They sent the entire prime contract in the sub-agreement and said, done. Problem was the sub balked. Legal review, weeks of negotiation, and ultimately, they ended up paying for all the extra clauses that never should have been there. CohnReznick and DAU both say, this is classic bad practice. It's a time and money sink, especially for small businesses that just want to provide a focused service.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Even with non-mandatory clauses like changes, stop work, or even default, those benefit the prime, but unless you purposefully put them in, they aren't required by regulation. Sometimes, though, you honestly should. It protects you if the government pulls the rug. But don't let a contract admin or legal team just use a template and call it a day. That's how you land in trouble, or worse, get performance issues.
So if you're listening and you're new to this, quick summary. Only flow down what you're required to. Double-check clause triggers. And if you're a sub, don't be afraid to ask, do we really have to accept every single clause you sent us? Odds are, the answer should be no.
Let's bring this all together with real best practices and tools, especially for small businesses or contractors jumping into compliance for the first time. CohnReznick's got a clear path here. First, read your contract. Not just the summary or cover sheet, every relevant clause. Then, build a flow-down matrix. Literally line out which clauses are required for each subcontract based on the type and value. It's a living list, especially when mods come in that could change your obligations.
Right, and don't stop there. You should also keep up with contract modifications. A new clause on something like cybersecurity or counterfeit electronic parts can pop up, and suddenly you need to update your subcontracts, or you're at risk. And, as a prime, remember that more isn't necessarily better. If you overload your sub with every clause possible, you're wasting negotiating energy and driving up prices, because the sub has to hedge for all that added risk.
Absolutely. And for subs, here's the real-world tip. Figure out fast which flowdowns are truly, by law or regulation, mandatory. Don't burn cycles on stuff you can't change anyway. But if something's not locked in, you can and should push back, especially on all prime contract requirements incorporated by reference. Those generic catch-alls are risky and overbroad. It's also smart to keep an eye out for hidden, onerous special terms slipped into an addendum or modification. Always ask, is this really required?
If you're searching for tools and support, start with the DAU provision and clause matrix. It's online, it's updated, and it shows you clause by clause what needs to be flowed down and when. There's also the National Defense Industrial Association studies on flowdowns, and a shout out to govcon360.com, which covers practical advice and walkthroughs for newbies and pros. All of these make compliance way less intimidating, and if you're feeling lost, find a trusted advisor or mentor group. You don't have to go it alone.
I'll just add one last best practice. For both primes and subs, track your clause dates, not just the numbers. Regulations change, and you want to make sure you're flowing the right version from your current prime, not some old template. And keep the lines of communication open between primes, subs, and advisors, so that if a new requirement lands, nobody's caught off guard.
Couldn't agree more, Paul. So that's our deep dive for today. Navigating contract flowdowns is complex, but if you're focused and a little bit methodical, it becomes very manageable. As always, thanks for joining us on FAR and DFARS Procurement Power. We'll be back with more insights and tips in our next episode. Paul, any last thoughts?
No, I think that wraps it, Eric. Appreciate the conversation and looking forward to next time. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody, for listening. See you on the next episode.